Okay, so my name is Robert SanGeorge. I am, in my day job, a career advisor for the School of Public Affairs. I've been at AU around 13 years now, doing a whole bunch of stuff, primarily advising graduate students and some undergraduates. And what we're going to cover today is what I call advanced strategies and tactics for job searching. A lot of this, in fact, the vast bulk of it is going to also apply to internship searching if you are in that market. And let's take it one by one and go from there. So I'm a believer in telling people what they're going to be hearing about before they hear about it. We're going to take a look at how you can think strategically about your job search. What is the optimal time frame for searching for jobs during the course of a calendar year? Where in the world do you want to be in terms of your job search? There's a number of implications to that question. What kind of a job hunter are you? Are you someone who is extremely focused and knows exactly what you want to be doing? Or are you someone who, at least at this point in time, is casting a wide net, so to speak? Okay. The differences among the main job search engines, well, particularly, I wouldn't call Twitter a job search engine, but LinkedIn and Indeed are the best job search engines. We're going to compare those and also make a bit of a comparison to how you can enhance your job search using Twitter, which is something you might not have thought about. And we're also going to talk about the AU Handshake system and a couple of other things like Glassdoor.com, for example, and Idealist.org. We're looking for nonprofit jobs in the nonprofit sector or internships in the nonprofit sector. So first thing to think about when you're starting your job search is what is the optimal time frame for searching? If you're, actually, this is going to be another slide, but I can cover it now. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump and then I'm going to go back. If you are graduating in May, the time to start, and I'm really hoping that I'm mostly talking to people who have not already graduated, because it's a little late to be thinking about it. But if you're graduating next May in 2022, you should be starting your job search in January and kind of building in intensity to the point where by late February, early March, you are really intensively looking for jobs. Depending upon what you're looking for and how focused or wide your search is, that can vary from applying for anywhere from 3 or 4 to 10 or 12 jobs a week, not just a month or something, but a week. Are you graduating in August? Perhaps I should recommend that you be starting your job search in March or April, certainly no later than that time. If you're a December graduate, you should be starting right after Labor Day, right at early September, you should be starting your job search. Thinking about specialized employers, in particular, management consulting firms and certain other types of employers that tend to do their recruiting way ahead of time. You need to be thinking about 8 or 9 months ahead of time, because those sorts of firms, those sorts of consulting firms, start interviewing people, and in some cases, even doing hiring for the ensuing May or June. They start doing that in many cases, in some cases, in November, December, okay? If you are thinking about a career that's going to require a significant a significant national security clearance, okay? If you're thinking about an intelligence agency or somewhere in Homeland Security, you've got to plan 12 to 18 months ahead of time. CIA security clearances can take as much as 18 months, particularly if you have a family background in a country that the U.S. Has concerns about, or if you've spent time in a semester abroad in a country, again, that the U.S. may have concerns about, a place like Russia or China, for example. You need to think pretty far ahead of time. The CIA probably has the longest delay in terms of security clearances and need to think way ahead when you're applying. But keep that in mind if you're thinking about a national security career. Also, another thing to consider is if you're going into your last semester as a senior or your last semester as a graduate student, can you because you've been really a hard worker and maybe you don't need to take a full-time academic load in your last semester, can you start thinking about applying for jobs even earlier and potentially starting full-time work several months before you graduate? That's something that people don't think about very much. It requires a certain amount of advanced planning, really a couple of years in advance, but again, something to think about. In general, with regardless of the issue of when you are searching, excuse me, when you are graduating, best times for job searching tend to be January through June and September through Thanksgiving. Summertime job postings are a little bit lighter, but that doesn't mean you should stop looking for jobs. Now, the period, however, between Thanksgiving and New Year's tends to be a lighter period for sure in terms of job postings, also internship postings, okay? And especially that period between Christmas and New Year's. And in many cases, employers don't really start gearing up again in terms of their job postings or internship postings until perhaps a week after New Year's. People take vacations, as they are going to be starting to take a lot of vacations again now. And so that can delay it even further. So that, again, think about that period between Thanksgiving and New Year's as one where yes, you should be applying for positions, but there's going to be probably fewer things available. So you want to be making hay in September and October and the first part of November. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the previous slide. And looking at the second bullet point, are you thinking only about DC, or that, not necessarily District of Columbia exclusively, but the District, Maryland, and Virginia? Okay. Are you thinking about other cities or other countries? Are you thinking about looking in a lot of these things simultaneously? That will significantly complicate your search, make it more challenging. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I am saying that you got to think about the implications of it. How can you narrow your search parameters so that you're not driving yourself crazy looking at hundreds and hundreds of potential job openings, the vast bulk of which are going to be irrelevant to your search? How can you avoid doing that? Are you already working in a relevant job, which takes a lot of pressure off in terms of finding something better? And what are the best tools for your job search? These are all the strategic questions that you should be confronting yourself with. And now we're going to look a little more specifically. So we talked about the time frame for searching, and I've really gone through all this. Let's skip to the next slide. Where do you want to be in the world? Okay. The District, Maryland, and Virginia only. Other cities. Here's the key. If you want to work in the District, Maryland, and Virginia, and right after graduation, you're moving back to your parents' home in Springfield, Illinois, or you're moving in with a friend in some other city, you absolutely must use a DC address if you're going to continue to apply for jobs in DC. That is, use the address of a friend or family. If all else fails, use AU's address, 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, DC. 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, DC. Why is this so important? Because many employers, and I mean like 80% of them probably in DC, and that's also the case in a lot of other major cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle, etc. They strongly prefer to hire people who are applying for entry-level jobs or somewhat above entry level. They strongly prefer to hire local people. And so a lot of times they will tell people who are scanning resumes for the first level of filtering of candidates, oh, if it's not local, just toss it. Okay, you don't want to be in that category. I can't tell you how many recent grads I've talked to over the years who have come to see me 4 months, 6 months after graduation saying, well, I've applied for 40 jobs, I've applied for 60 jobs, and I've gotten 1 interview or 2 interviews. And then I look at their resume, and what is it? They're applying for jobs in DC, but they don't have a DC address on their resume. Or they're applying for jobs in New York, and they don't have a New York address, etc. That's a big problem. It's a bigger problem than you would realize. So I can't emphasize this enough. I probably pounded you about it sufficiently so you'll remember. Now, looking for jobs outside the United States. Challenging if you do not hold a passport or are not a citizen or a legal resident of the country you're targeting, especially when we're talking, for example, about Europe. There are still issues right now about being able to even get into certain countries with regard to COVID. A lot of that is going to be relaxed. I think a lot of European countries recently said, I don't know if it was the whole European Union or not, but said they would be allowing Americans back in mainly because they want tourists. You need to do the research necessary to understand also the difference in resumes. Resumes in applying for Europe tend to be more detailed. Oftentimes employers want to see a thumbnail photo of you at the top. In the US, it's illegal to ask someone to put a photograph, to send a photograph, because potentially it could be used for age discrimination, racial or ethnic discrimination, etc. In Europe, that's sometimes standard, okay? Not necessarily all the time, but some of the time it's standard. Also, resumes tend to be more detailed in other countries, particularly in European countries. So those are things you want to get to know about. What is your strategy for getting a first interview outside of DC, if you're living there now, or outside of wherever you're living? Clearly, you want to ask to do a Zoom or Skype video call. And of course, fortunately for all of you, that's become a lot easier to ask for in the last, 15 months or so. So think about that in terms of especially trying to avoid having to travel somewhere and incur that expense just to do a first round interview and then find out that you're not getting past the first round, okay? I see we don't have any questions, so I'm just going to keep going, but remind you, please ask questions at any point in time. So what kind of job hunter are you? Again, we're thinking strategically here. Are you someone who does not yet have a well-defined career focus, so you're casting a much wider net in terms of what you're thinking about? Or are you highly focused on a particular employment sector or even a particular set of employers, okay? Or are you kind of somewhere in between? You have some idea of what you want to be doing in terms of the employment sector, but not as highly focused. Think about that and figure out where you fall. That's important. People who are casting a wide net, then how should you be trying to focus down? Let's think of it as kind of an inverted pyramid, right? Starting out broad and working your way into a more narrow focus. First of all, are you thinking about government? Are you thinking about government on the federal level or on a state level or on a local level or all of them potentially? If you're staying in the DC area, are you thinking about federal contractors? This is a major employment sector in the DC area, in case you didn't know it. A lot of opportunity here. The nonprofit community, also a large employment sector. It can vary greatly in terms of compensation, however. Large nonprofit organizations, the American Red Cross, AARP, pay really well. Really small nonprofits pay smaller. Basically, the smaller the nonprofit, the smaller the pay. Also, faith-based organizations tend to pay less. That's another thing to note. That's not an anti-religious comment, but just a fact of life. Are you thinking about the corporate sector? In the District of Maryland, Virginia, this can often mean consulting firms or federal contractors. As you probably know, there aren't a lot of real private sector large employers. One that comes to mind in this area is Marriott Corporation, okay? Their national headquarters is here. But a lot of the others, when you think about major corporations in DC, like let's say Lockheed Martin, well, it's a major defense contractor, so really it's a federal contractor. They largely would not exist without the federal government. So that's for wide net casters, right? Connecting with leads and jobs. How do you go about doing this? This is the next thing that a lot of people think about. Networking receptions. Hopefully in this coming year, whether or not you are a recent alum or whether you're a current student, and recent alums still will have the opportunity to do this, we are hoping to be able to open up what we call our student alumni networking receptions. We're hoping hoping to be able to open those up to being in person. I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm saying that we're thinking about it. Okay. We had to do these virtually, and as I'm sure you realize, going to a stand-up networking reception in the atrium of the SIS building, or another conference room on the other side of Nebraska Avenue and some of the new buildings over there. That's a pretty good way to meet employers, chat them up, right? Doing that virtually is tough. We have done alumni student networking receptions virtually. We do it as well as we can. The attendance has been good, but it doesn't work as well as online. And so we're talking about that. Job fairs. Will we be doing virtual job fairs or not? The job fairs work pretty well virtually, okay, as opposed to doing them in the Bender basketball arena. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't prefer to do it in person. What are we going to do this fall? I can't tell you. I'm not sure. We haven't planned it yet. We definitely are doing job fairs. The virtual fairs have attracted, numbers that are nearly as high in terms of students and in terms of employers as we've had with in-person job fairs. Alumni Fire. I'm going to talk about this a bit more a little bit later. This is a great way to network with alumni who have volunteered to mentor and work with AU students in whatever particular sector they are working in. That's the address for Alumni Fire to sign up for it if you've not done it. And there's also a link to it via the Handshake system. But anyway, informational interviewing. It's a good way to meet people. Never try to turn an informational interview into a job interview. Never try to start making your pitch. When you contact someone who agrees to do an informational interview, the understanding is that you are not trying to make a job pitch. You are trying to get information, and you're asking questions like, what are the hiring trends in your, for your employer? What are the hiring trends in the employment sector that you work in for environmental nonprofits or for federal defense contractors, thinking of different kinds of employment sectors. Those are the sorts of questions you want to ask. You might want to get an evaluation from them of your resume, but don't take direction from just one person who is not a specialist in resumes and completely revise your resume into some other kind of format. I've seen some very oddly formatted resumes from people who have done that, who have taken advice from someone they maybe didn't even know very well, who's not a career advising professional, and who sent them off on a significantly bad tangent in terms of the way their resume looks. Use the contacts you already have among fellow students, students you've met who were a class ahead of you and have already graduated and already have jobs. Family, friends, okay? Yes, your parents' friends, if possible. Do not be embarrassed to use any contact you can possibly, reasonably and appropriately make use of to start getting contacts in terms of jobs and job searching. And then, of course, we have job boards, which we will talk a lot about. Now, I want you to think, remember I talked about the inverted pyramid, right? So this is, I think, a pretty good guide as to how to focus your job search from broadly to, very focused and narrowly. Asking yourself questions like, what do I want to be? Okay, hopefully you've already answered that to some degree, but maybe not all of you. Where do I want to be? Okay, geographically speaking. What kind of job do I mostly want to do? And that doesn't necessarily mean I want to be a research analyst for a major think tank in DC. It doesn't have to be that specific. What kind of job, do you enjoy research more than hands-on work with other people? Okay, which would mean, maybe you should be a researcher or a policy analyst. On the other hand, if you like working with people a lot, maybe you want to put yourself in a position of getting into a management track. whether it's in the for-profit sector or the nonprofit sector, the government or whatever, okay? What is the link between my degree and my job? This is particularly, especially if you are an undergraduate and you're thinking about grad school, that is a key question you've got to ask before you commit to grad school. What's the link going to be between that graduate degree and the job that I ultimately want to have, the type of job, okay? Because, for example, if you wanted to go into more of a management function, well, maybe you'd like to do a Master of Public Administration degree, which is what a lot of people do when they want to become managers in government, in federal contracting, and then in the nonprofit sector. But if you want to be a researcher, there's all kinds of different degrees you can do throughout the university. And also, by the way, management, I mean, the Master of Business Administration is another significant one in terms of the private sector. So what's the link between the degree and my job? And also, if you're for undergrads, you know, am I majoring in computer science? Am I coming out of my undergraduate years with strong quantitative skills, with strong data analytics skills? Those are, again, links between not just your degree, but the courses you've taken and the job you want to seek. What employment sector? Are you looking at the nonprofit sector? Do you like the idea of working for causes? What are the for-profit sector, the corporate sector, or government? Okay, and government at a federal level, a state level, or a municipal level. Am I more comfortable working for a large employer or a small employer? What are the advantages? Well, I can tell you I've done both. Large employer, you're backed up by a lot of people, by large teams. There are support systems in place. There are strong human resources offices, etc. Small employers, you tend to get to do more. You tend to get to be able to maneuver more and learn more, especially early in your career. You tend to be a bit more constrained with a larger employer where your job description is pretty well defined and you don't have necessarily a lot of room to maneuver within that. On the other hand, with small employers, you don't have the kind of backup with human resources specialists and things like that behind you. Also, the smaller employer generally means smaller salary, okay? And what, by the way, what are your salary expectations? If salary is the most important thing to you, then maybe you want to be thinking about the private sector, okay? If it's less important, I mean, it's important to everyone, right? But there are degrees of how important salary is. And you need to be thinking about that in terms of, am I looking at the nonprofit sector or the government sector or the private sector, all right? Can I identify, let's say, 10 specific employers that I am interested in working on? And can I be researching them to see, number one, what are the opportunities? What are they looking for? What are their expectations in terms of the experience, the kind of internship experience I might have had, the degree or degrees that I have or will have? How can I go about finding relevant job postings? We'll address that in a few moments. The really important thing when you're applying for jobs is that you have your job search set up so that you are seeing relevant jobs that you want to apply to, if at all possible, within 24 to 48 hours of the time they've been posted. This is particularly important for the DMV area. And then when you see those magical jobs that you really want to apply to, you are applying very promptly, which means virtually immediately. You're not going to sleep that night without getting that job application in, because for the vast bulk of you, most of the jobs you're going to be applying for are going to require you sending an email with an attachment, cover letter and resume, right? The longer you delay applying for those jobs, the faster you will drop down the email queue. And depending on the nature of what you're applying for and how competitive it is, an employer may well stop opening emails after 75 emails that they've received or 100 emails. And I will tell you that for competitive entry-level positions in the DC area, employers will typically get 100 emails within 48 hours, okay? So that's why speed of finding the jobs and then applying for the jobs is so important. And that inherently means you don't mess around fiddling with cover letters for too long. Yes, a cover letter needs to be perfect in terms of no typos and no grammatical errors, but it doesn't need to read like Hemingway. It just needs to be good and coherent, but doesn't have to be great, because by and large, you are going to live and die in terms of whether or not you get an interview for that job. You're going to live and die with your resume 80, 90% of the time. Once you get those interviews, then there's issues of interview preparation. You can rely on AU career advisors, for example, to prepare for interviews. There's also, for example, in the Handshake system, there's something called Big Interview that's available to you to be able to record on a webcam, record yourself answering certain types of questions, and then you can critique yourself. And most people tend to be their worst critic, which is a good thing in terms of seeing how well you're doing in an interview. Finally, there's the happy circumstance of a salary negotiation and how that should be handled. And then eventually starting a new job. Okay, so that's it. And if you notice the two, overriding pieces of advice I have on the left and right side, you want to be making contacts and you want to be doing research on employers and on specific kind of jobs. Let's keep going. No one has any questions. So the focused job hunter, we talked about the person casting a wide net. The focused job hunter is clear about what job sector or sectors they are targeting. It's someone who, at least to some degree, can focus on even specific employers, okay? Looks for individual contacts to make with particular companies, tries to get informational interviewing with some of those people. Also, if at all possible, and it's not always possible, in fact, it's usually only possible a small percentage of the time, you want to be what's known as an internal referral. What is an internal referral? That's where you have a friend who works for a particular employer who is willing to refer your resume to the HR office or to the hiring manager for a specific vacancy they have now. The fact is, and there's research on this to back me up, internally referred applicants, particularly in the private sector, and especially, for example, at places like consulting firms, are a third more likely to be hired. And why are they more likely to be hired? Because the companies have found, as well as, in some cases, nonprofits or federal contractors, that those people are a lot more likely to be really good employees as time goes on. I notice we do have a question. Someone told me it's important to reach out to alumni or people who are doing what you want to do through LinkedIn. If possible, do this with as many people as possible. Yes, that is very good advice. And I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to talk about Alumni Fire, which in many ways is superior to LinkedIn, although I wouldn't say you shouldn't use LinkedIn to try to contact people. But give me a moment to talk about that. And actually, this slide. Okay, so this is the homepage of Alumni Fire. Okay, the way you sign up for it is you go to Handshake, and on the left side navigation, there will be a link that says resources, and then it'll say Alumni Fire, and then you're there. I also gave you the address of Alumni Fire. As you can see in the lower right corner, you can sign up via LinkedIn, via Facebook, via with your email address. What is Alumni Fire? At this point in time, it is more than 3,000 alumni who have volunteered to mentor current students in terms of their job application process, also internship application process. They cover a lot of different fields throughout the university. Will they cover every highly specific field you're interested in? I can't guarantee that, but it's evolved into a quite robust system. It's only 3 years old, and we've got more than 3,000 people signed up. And the big difference between this and reaching out to someone on LinkedIn is that when you reach out to people on LinkedIn, they have volunteered to do anything, right? These folks that you would contact via Alumni Fire are a lot more likely to respond positively to you. Now, how does it work? Generally speaking, if someone is in high demand, if they work for an employer that a lot of people want to work for, they will place a limit, and you can understand this, on how many students they're willing to work with in a month. It might be 3 people, it might be 5 people, something like that. But then at the end of the month, those 3 or 5 people they've been working with, their term is over, at least for that month, and 3 to 5 new people can come in and work with this alum. And remember, there's 3,000 plus of these people. So that's how Alumni Fire works. What will they do? You know, they'll look at resumes. They'll give you advice about, you know, what are the employment trends in their job sector? What are the employment trends for their particular employer? You know, they can give you certain kinds of advice with regard to cover letters, how to handle interviews, etc. Okay. Should you contact people via LinkedIn? I think that's the next slide. Well, no, it's not quite. But let me talk about LinkedIn for a moment before I get back to this. Comparing Alumni Fire to LinkedIn. Okay, there are more than 100,000, I think it's like 110,000 AU alumni on LinkedIn, compared to 3,000 who have volunteered to work with students on Alumni Fire. As I say, those 110,000 you know, AU alumni haven't volunteered to do anything. Yes, you can contact them via LinkedIn. If you do, your opening to them needs to be soft, not please help me find a job or something to that effect. It should be, I'm looking for, and here's the magic word, advice. Okay, that word I have found, and a lot of your alumni colleagues have found that word works a lot better than I'm looking for a job, that sort of thing. I'm looking for advice. Okay, people generally feel flattered when someone says they are looking for, they want to deal with them in terms of giving them advice, and they're going to respond a lot more positively. There are ways of doing that in which when you go into the AU database for LinkedIn, and I do believe I'm getting to that a little bit later, in which you can start to focus down. You know, I'm looking at, I only want to look at alumni who work in management consulting in the DC area. Okay, that's the way you can start to focus down from the 110,000 or so alumni who are on LinkedIn. So let's keep going here. Now, when I talk about LinkedIn in this context, in this slide, I'm talking about LinkedIn jobs in terms of job searching, all right? Not as a networking device. What's best for you in terms of what you're going to use to look for a job? Among the large search engines, the 2 best are LinkedIn and Indeed. LinkedIn, in my opinion, and I use it a lot, okay? So I'm giving you this advice as someone who I immodestly will say is very informed on the subject. LinkedIn is very good. Indeed is good. It's not great, but LinkedIn is great in terms of looking for jobs and internship. The issue is being able to use their filters properly so that you're not looking at hundreds of unrealistic jobs. Twitter we'll go into in a moment in more detail. LinkedIn is user-friendly. It's the, as I mentioned, best of the big job search engines. And of course, it's most important for building your online profile. Remember that profile, and you must have a LinkedIn profile. Any employer is going to look at that profile, even if they're considering you for an unpaid internship, okay? And it needs to be absolutely perfect. You want someone else to read it over so that there is no chance there's going to be any kind of typo or misspelling or grammatical error in that profile of yourself on LinkedIn. Indeed offers a lot of job leads. Okay, it's more user-friendly than it used to be. I used to say a lot more about it that was negative, but I don't anymore. They've corrected a lot of the issues. Twitter, you know, you can set up, as many of you know, if you use Twitter, it has a multitude of information streams that you could set up and have them all coming into you at once. The issue is that you can overwhelm yourself with it pretty easily, okay? Now, LinkedIn. In particular, there's the URL, linkedin.com/jobs, okay? Let's go here. So this is what it looks like. And now this is a screen capture. This is not LinkedIn Jobs Live, all right? But the most important thing here is to look at the filters, okay? The one where it says past week here, it will come up to you as saying date posted. This is a really important filter because if you don't click on it, you could be looking at postings that are 5 months old and they are long gone, believe me, right? Optimally, you want to be using LinkedIn at least once a week if you're in a significant job search, preferably more than once a week, but let's say at least once a week, so that you can limit your searches to just the past week. Think about it. The difference between saying past week or past month in the filter is that you'll look at about 4 times as much stuff, right? 4 weeks versus 1 week, okay? They'll also want to know what is the radius around whatever city you're looking at, like DC. For DC, they offer, and LinkedIn offers a 25-mile radius option, 40 kilometers. That is more or less the extent of the metro system, and that's probably a good one to choose. You do not want to use the filter that says company. That will take you down to just one employer, and it's just not useful. I would stay away from the salary filter because you don't really know what stuff is going to pay, and I would just leave that alone. For location, you want to confirm that you're, looking in whatever city you're looking in particular DC. There is another filter that they've inserted during the pandemic, and it's called remote. At this point in time, don't click on it for 2 reasons. First of all, a lot of jobs are returning to being in the office. Not too many yet, but it's coming. I can see it coming. Secondly, some employers, even when they're going to allow you to work remotely, they're neglecting to say that. They're neglecting to use the words virtual or remote in their job description or internship description. But if you use that filter, you might well be filtering out stuff that you would otherwise want to see. So don't click on the remote filter. Don't click on the company filter, okay? And then what happens is pretty easy to understand. You click on a brief description on the left side, like this job at TikTok. This is a few months old, by the way. This is not a recent screen capture. And then a longer description comes up. You click on show more or read more, and you can see a full job description. And then you have an opportunity to apply on the company website or via LinkedIn. Either way, it's still okay. And then you start scrolling down the left side to see other opportunities. You click on individual opportunities. Detailed descriptions come up, and you get a chance to use it. That's how LinkedIn works, okay? Indeed works very similarly. The filters are very similar, and anybody can pretty much figure it out pretty easily. Any questions about that, please ask them. Another issue with regard to LinkedIn, you are more likely to be found by an employer or a recruiter on LinkedIn than on any other platform. Recruiters and big HR departments of large employers are constantly scouring LinkedIn for specific candidates. Now, I do want to tell you, generally, this does not happen for people seeking entry-level employment, because in most cities, there's plenty of folks seeking entry-level jobs, and they don't really need to pay recruiters or have their HR staff spend a lot of time finding people who via LinkedIn. But as your career progresses, it's going to be really important to keep up your LinkedIn profile, number one. And number two, there's a place on LinkedIn. I'm not going to show it on these slides because LinkedIn often changes the format of this stuff from time to time. There's a place where you get a choice of clicking on one of 3 dots. One of them says actively looking, meaning actively looking for a job, which you could click on. Another one says something like not actively looking, but open to inquiries, okay? I would urge all of you, pretty much, unless you're just so totally happy as a clam in what you're doing that you don't even want to be contacted by anybody about potentially, better paying employment. I would click on that, not actively looking, if you're not actively looking, but open to inquiries. And then the other option is not open to inquiries, don't bother me, okay? So make sure you've got that clicked on your LinkedIn profile. it can make a huge difference as your career goes on in terms of getting contacted by recruiters. As I mentioned before, whatever you got up there in terms of your listing of your jobs and internships, your education, the written profile, the narrative profile of yourself, it has to be flawless with no typos, no grammatical errors, nothing like that. Build your LinkedIn network, link with people, okay? That also reflects well on you. Endorse people for their skill set, and that will encourage them to endorse you for your skill set on LinkedIn. In some cases, depending on what it is you're going to be doing, you may well want to ask, well, acquaintances is probably not the right word, professors, former supervisors, current supervisors, to recommend you. Now, what does that mean? That means that you give them your LinkedIn address. They can write a recommendation for you. Typically, it's only a couple hundred words. We're not talking about a long recommendation letter. And it touches on subjects such as research skills, analytical skills, oral communication, written communication, how hard you work, stuff like that, okay? And the person then writes that, reads it over hopefully, and clicks submit. It doesn't automatically go on your profile until you have gotten a notification that someone has submitted a recommendation, and then you get to read it and decide whether you want it online with your profile. And then you can take it off at some point in time if it becomes, when it becomes out of date, okay? So that's another thing to think about in terms of the way of using LinkedIn. Indeed.com can tend to send you irrelevant leads, but the filters have gotten a lot better. They're more like the filters on LinkedIn. You want to limit your search to 7 days maximum, and the search radius to about 25 miles around DC. You want to be using good search terms. Again, don't use that remote filter, as I mentioned with regard to LinkedIn. There's an experience filter that where you're rating your level of experience. You may well want to stay away from it completely. And don't use the company filter because, as I said before, with regard to LinkedIn, that can narrow you down to one employer. And the salary filter, you don't know what stuff pays. I would just leave it alone and find out later what a job is going to pay. That's what Indeed looks like. You can see the filters are very similar to what you saw on LinkedIn. And yeah, not much else to say about that. You click on something on the left side, well, you don't see it here because I hadn't done it. You click on the left side and a more detailed description comes up on the right side. You have an option of either applying through Indeed or, in many cases, applying via the employer's own application system, which is preferable, obviously, in most cases. Twitter. Okay, this is something you may not have thought about in terms of your job search or your internship search. First thing I would recommend for most people, if you've been using Twitter in a highly personal way, and in a way that may be fun but is a bit goofy, you may want to create a separate Twitter account that showcases you in a professional way. That means the handle, your Twitter handle, should be something professional. You should only, if you're going to tweet at all, maybe you don't tweet very much in any case, but if you're going to tweet at all, you want to tweet professionally relevant content about yourself with interesting observations about things in your field, but not too controversial, okay? Here's the big thing. You want to be following employers and people who are relevant to your career, your current or future career, okay? Sometimes employers you want to target will actually post jobs on Twitter. So you want to follow those accounts. It's easy to get overwhelmed by incoming information on Twitter. If you start following 500 employers, what's the purpose of that? Because it's going to be too much stuff and you're going to miss a lot of it. So you want to stay really focused in terms of the way you're using this. Whoops, I just went too far there. This is a shameless promotion for the Twitter account that I maintain, okay? If you're not an SBA student, you probably haven't heard about it. but you're welcome to join. It is a private account, okay? The address over here in the left-hand corner, @AU_SPA careers, @AU_SPA careers. I tweet these days around 350 jobs and internships a month. They are the kinds of jobs and internships that are relevant to people in the School of Public Affairs, but that's still pretty broad. There's a lot of communications related stuff there. There's management related stuff there. There's a lot of tweets for jobs that relate to the social sciences in particular that people in the College of Arts and Sciences might be interested in. Overwhelmingly, you notice that well, this says 1,320 followers. We've actually, these days, we're just shy of 1,800 followers. Overwhelmingly, that's people in the School of Public Affairs, but it is open to people who are not in the School of Public Affairs, okay? And if you've never dealt with it's because it is a private Twitter account. I keep Georgetown and GW students out of it, as well as people from other universities who would like to get in, because there may not be another school doing a School of Public Affairs, that is, providing this kind of service of tweeting that much relevant content in terms of jobs and internships. It ranges from, by the way, unpaid internships to paid internships to full-time jobs where the employer wants someone with a bachelor's degree to full-time jobs where they want somebody with a master's degree, okay? So it's that range. Not very many unpaid internships are posted. I typically only post unpaid internships if I know there are fairly prestigious internships that people are interested in. The State Department does a really good internship program that lots of people like to apply to, including a lot of folks at AU, because you get a security clearance out of it, but it is unpaid, okay? I do tweet that when it comes around 3 times a year for fall, spring, and summer interns, as an example, okay? We tweet 5 days a week, okay, Monday through Friday. The vast bulk of the tweeting is done by 11:30 in the morning. Occasionally, here and there, a tweet in the afternoon, but it's meant to be pretty reliable. All right. So if you've never dealt with a private Twitter account before and you want access, what you need to do is go to that address on Twitter @AU_SPA careers. And it'll say, more politely than this, it'll say, you can't see these tweets, okay? And then it'll say, click follow, okay? Follow to request access. When you do that, it sends me a message, and then I look at it and I give you access, okay? I'm not looking at it 24/7, so it might take a few hours, but yes, you can get access that way. So that's SPA Careers. Twitter account. There are every other AU school offers all the other Twitter accounts are wide open, so that they're not closed, they're not private, that is. SIS has one, SOC, CAS, COGOT, and the main AU Career Center. They don't really, as far as I know, they don't post jobs and internships there, but they post a lot of career related information there. Okay, so that's Twitter in terms of AU. Now, what else can you get off Twitter? A lot of stuff. And this is where, you can start to overwhelm your stuff. So you want to think it through. If you look on the right side at all those hashtags, do you want to live in Boston? Well, maybe you want to follow hashtag Boston jobs, okay? Or New York City, hashtag New York City jobs, or New Jersey jobs, okay? Los Angeles, Miami, Denver, etc., okay? Looking at the left-hand column, the USA Jobs has a Twitter account. There's another one called Fed Careers. US OPM, that's the Office of Personnel Management, which is kind of the HR of the federal government, right? And in terms of politics, there's something called Democratic Gain on the right wing side. There's the right jobs. There's hashtag think tank jobs, etc. I'm not going to read them all, but that's the kind of stuff available. Now, be aware that there are nuances here. If you're interested in public health jobs, are you going to follow hashtag public health jobs, all lowercase, or hashtag public health jobs with some uppercase? Those are different hashtags. Same thing with San Francisco jobs with a capital S and F versus all lowercase, right? Be aware of these kinds of nuances for things you might be missing otherwise. How can you interact effectively with employers via what Twitter users call DM, direct messaging on Twitter? You want to be careful and professional. If you see a job posted by somebody in an HR department of an employer you want to work for, and you want to interact with them, maybe they didn't say what the deadline for applications is. So maybe you want to send a direct message to that person and say, you know, excuse me, can you tell me what the deadline is? Okay. You're always going to be upbeat and enthusiastic when you interact with people on Twitter via direct message. And if you're asking questions, they should be thoughtful questions. Okay. Don't try to do all of this on your phone, because you could probably get lost. I mean, I know that a lot of people are just used to Twitter. Twitter equals smartphone, okay? You may want to organize Twitter bookmarks on a browser. So for example, to go back to, whoops, that's not what I wanted. To go back to this, you might want to bookmark some of these hashtags or Twitter account addresses on a browser to use them, you know, in a more organized fashion, okay? Now, let's get to Handshake. And again, if you have a question, ask it at any point. Handshake, you may not be aware, uses artificial intelligence over time to predict the kind of jobs and internships and career events that are relevant to you. So the more you use Handshake, the more it gets to know you, which I know in some ways is a little creepy, particularly if you've had experiences with this in terms of, say, Amazon.com, which I use a lot. But it is meant to be helpful in certain ways, okay? Handshake is mobile friendly. There are several thousand jobs and internships posted directly to AU students per year on Handshake, okay? I will tell you that a lot of the internships are unpaid, okay? It tends to skew toward internships that are primarily focused on younger undergraduates, first-year people, sophomores, and a lot of them tend to be unpaid. But there are paid internships there, and there are full-time jobs, okay? And it is possible to filter that information on Handshake. So it can be a valuable resource. The value of Handshake for me and for my colleagues who do career advising is that we can basically screen employers and let them post directly to you, the students and recent alumni, as opposed to having to look at every single job and internship, these thousands of them, before we actually let them go on Handshake. So it's a more efficient system, as long as we've, you know, and which we have, filtered the employers to make sure that they're not running scams or whatever. A quick note about artificial intelligence interviewing. I actually have a whole webinar and a fact sheet on this. AI interviewing is here, and it's being used more and more by employers, especially in the private sector. It's starting to be used in the government sector and in federal contracting. What does it mean? It's used mostly for interviewing first-round candidates, and it evaluates. It's basically looking at you. It's looking at every twitch of your face. It's listening to every word you say. It's evaluating your use of keywords and phrases relevant to or not relevant to a particular job that you're applied to. It's evaluating how much you use filler words like or okay, which I've done a few times in this presentation. It's evaluating your use of repetitive words. Do you say like too much? Drives me crazy, but you know, there are people who do that. And there are people who say you know too much. And really, as another phrase that's used too much, if you use this stuff too much, it's going to give you a lower score. I mean, be candid about it. It's looking for facial expressions and facial tics. It's looking at your eye movement. How much are you making, you know, really good eye contact with that webcam? Okay. It's looking at your posture and body movement. My posture right now is fairly relaxed. If I were in an AI interview, I'd be sitting up more like this. Not exactly military style, but straight up. I wouldn't be leaning back at all as I am now. So it's evaluating your posture and your body movement. It's also evaluating how much you smile, okay? Are you smiling too much? Is it forced, right? Or are you not smiling much at all? And are you just, for which it will draw conclusions about how nervous you are or how maybe unfriendly and unsmiling you are. Employers will get an automated evaluation report out of this. Now, there's one company that dominates this field. It's called HireVue. They do not in the reports say, oh, don't hire this person, right? Or hire this person. They don't do that. They just give the employer the metrics on issues of, for example, sociability. If it's a job that requires a lot of contact with people and it doesn't look like you smile very much or you're very friendly in certain things that it picks up, it will give you low scores in that, and your sociability score will be low for a job that might require significant sociability. And so there'll be a number of factors that we'll evaluate, not just sociability. And the employer makes a decision as to who goes on to the second round. Typically, AI interviewing at this point, but I'm sure it will progress. At this point, it's not being used beyond first round interviewing, okay? We have on Handshake something called Big Interview. When you go to the left side navigation bars on Handshake on the main page, you click on resources and then you will see Big Interview, and you can actually practice AI interviews, and it will give you a report on how you did answering certain questions relevant to the kind of jobs you were applying for. It will give you a report, not identical to, but similar to the kind of report that an employer would get. Are you not smiling enough? Are you not making good eye contact? Are you moving around too much? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so can be quite useful. Typically what happens, how do you know when you're getting an AI interview? Because an employer will tell you. They'll say, okay, here's a URL, click on this in the next 5 days or the next 3 days, and you'll be asked a series of questions. And just look at your webcam and answer them. The issue about this is most people feel extremely self-conscious and nervous doing this because they realize they're not talking to a person, they're talking to algorithms that are evaluating them. That's about all I'm going to say on this now. I actually have done and will do in the future a web presentation, a webinar on this. Now, additional job search tools. Idealist.org. Really good for looking for jobs in the nonprofit sector only, although it's way smaller than LinkedIn and Indeed.com. Glassdoor.com can be okay for job searching. Its real strength is that it has a lot of information about employers. People post information about how their interviews went with a particular employer, what kinds of questions they ask, what kind of salary levels are they being offered, if they are being offered salary levels for particular jobs. This is especially useful for larger employers where obviously a lot of candidates and a lot of people potentially posting. It's also really good, especially for consulting firms, if we're finding out about what kind of questions you're going to be asked. And for those of you in the School of Public Affairs, there is something, or who are alumni School of Public Affairs, there's something called the SBA Alumni Career Resources Intranet, which if you send me an email, and I'll tell you what, I'll write my email right now into, I can't remember whether I have it coming up, but anyway. Yep, that's correct. So in the chat box, you see my email. If you want to get access to the SBA Alumni Career Resources Intranet, but you need to be an alum. If you are a current student and you're at the School of Public Affairs, you have access to a Canvas site that has the exact same information. However, any AU student, any AU alum, regardless of whether or not you went to SBA, can access the SBA Alumni Intranet. Just email, actually, you don't email me, I'm sorry, I should have read my own slide. Email au.sbacareers@gmail.com. I'll need your full name, your degree program, and your graduation date, so I know you're really an AU person. And that's what you do. au.spacareers@gmail.com. Okay. For those who want career advising appointments, by the way, I only advise basically SBA grad students and some undergraduates, mainly seniors. But there are career advisors for every school at AU. If you go to that rather long address on the second bullet point, but just go to american.edu/careers, career center, american.edu/career center, and you will be able to find who your career advisor is if you don't know who that person is, and you can set up an appointment via Handshake with them. Okay. And the great thing about doing it on Handshake is that you can see all their available upcoming appointment slots over the next, say, couple of weeks. And if you are an SBA grad student, senior, or an SBA alum, you can schedule appointments with me via Handshake at that address, which is right there. Also want to mention there are other sessions coming up. You notice this one today on advanced job search strategizing. There's going to be one on resumes and cover letters on June 22. These are all Eastern times, by the way, in case you're in some other time zone. Using social media in your job search, I'm going to go a lot more into how to do that. That's my presentation. What can you get out of the AU Career Center in terms of overall, not just your advisor, but there's a lot of other stuff we do. Particularly if you're newer to AU, either as a grad student or as an undergrad, you might want to do that. How do you build professional relationships in a virtual environment? Okay, that's a pretty good, challenging question, and a colleague of mine is going to handle that. Another session on federal resumes, another one on interview prep, and another one on salary negotiations, how to handle salary negotiations. I think I am doing that one. I don't remember. But anyway, these are all coming up between now and July 27. All those times are Eastern. And by the way, they're all being recorded. So if for some reason you can't make one of those sessions, please be advised that you can find it on the AU Career Center YouTube channel, which you can find by just going to YouTube and type in American University Career Center. And you'll come up with our YouTube channel and you'll find these presentations. They're not all there now because some of them haven't, all of them, except this one, have not happened yet, but they'll be coming up. So if no one else has questions, I'm going to end the session now. If you wanted to email me privately, because you didn't want to do it in front of other folks, I'll be around for a little bit. And that's it. Enjoyed speaking with you. And thank you very much for your attention this evening. Good night.